So I've dedicated an entire lesson just on importing Photoshop layer documents, pictures that you may have taken on your DSLR, and or images that you may have downloaded from the internet. Now, why would I do that? Here's why. So many new editors make the mistake of not understanding what I'm about to show you, and then they wonder down the road, wow, what's going on? Why isn't this working? Why doesn't this image work, or why doesn't that photo fit? It's because they're just not following some of the basic rules of properly importing Photoshop layer documents, photos that may be taken on a DSLR, or images or graphic files that they downloaded from the internet. All three of those are extremely popular and done on a daily per project basis. So, and I firmly believe that you're going to agree with me that after this lesson, you'll say, wow, those are all so important items. I'm so glad I watched this lesson. So let's just jump right into this. I'm going to import a Photoshop layer document. And by the way, if you don't know Photoshop, this lesson is still important, but I encourage you to learn Photoshop. It's a little challenging at first, but when you get the basics down, boy, you'll be glad you did, because it's such a powerful tool. Anyway, let's import a Photoshop layer document. I'm going to navigate it to the word file here in the upper left-hand corner, mouse click and select file, import. Then I'll navigate to my external drive, go to the project folder, and then I'll go to my Photoshop layer document. There it is. There's the preview, nice, and then I'll select import. Now, Adobe Premiere will give me some options, but by default, this little guy will show up here, merge all layers. And if I wanted to flatten this layered document, I could just simply select the OK button and it would all be done, and I would bring this in. However, number one, I created this in Photoshop, and I want access to all these layers because it's a corporate logo, and I want to animate parts of this logo. And in order to do that, I have to have access to all these parts. So I'm going to click on this little button here, this little triangle button, mouse click and select sequence. And there's a lot of good options here, but this, I believe, is the most efficient option. I'm going to select sequence, and look how all the layers now are highlighted. They're all available. I could, if I wanted to, I could not import some of these. If this was a 50 layer Photoshop document, I would turn off some of these and not import them, but I want them all. That's what these check marks resemble. And then I'll select OK. And a couple things will happen. Number one, I'll get a bin over here in my project window, which is nice, or my project tab. And then I'll select this little triangle here to the left of the bin to reveal the contents. And what that option gave me is all the individual layers, which I'll double click on now to show you. You can see them in the source window. And it also gave me a sequence. So that's quite nice, because not only do I have access to all the layers if I want on an individual basis, but I have access to a sequence with all the layers stacked. So I'll double click on that, and there it is. In fact, let me push the letter Z on my keyboard to zoom in. Click, click. I'll push the letter V to put the zoom tool back. And the way this is stacked is exactly the way I made it in Photoshop, which may not sound too important, but as I was building this is a corporate logo, I had video in mind, of course, and I wanted certain layers to be in certain places. And I'll give you an example. So the top two layers are text, which I can turn off. I can turn those off by clicking on the little eyeball. I could turn on or off any of these if I want. I could turn the background layer off if I wanted. But that's the beauty of importing a Photoshop layer document, is Adobe Premiere will give me the access to all the individual layers, or all the layers merged, which I'll show you next. So here are all the individual layers stacked, right? I'll close this out, and let's call this particular sequence, even though it's empty, let's pretend it's my editing sequence. I'm going to build my movie here. I want to then bring my logo down, and I'll bring the sequence item down into this other sequence here, which is technically nesting a sequence, but look what happened. It merged it down into one layer, which makes it quite nice to move this around because it's a single layer of visual elements merged down to one, which I know there's audio here. In fact, let's get rid of that audio. I'll push the Option key on my keyboard, mouse click and drag just to select the audio, and then I'll push delete. On a PC, it's Alt. You want to push the Alt key down, mouse click and drag, or mouse click on that and then push delete. So here is my Photoshop layer document merged conveniently down to one layer. So I don't have all those layers stacked up. This is really moving everything around quite nicely because it's in a container. But here's one of the other nice features of the way Adobe Premiere imported this layered document is if I want access to those layers, simply double click, and there they are. As a matter of fact, I could change, let's turn off those two top layers like I did a moment ago. I could change those, close this out, Actually, I didn't change them. I just turned them off. And then here in my flattened version, you don't see those text layers. Quite nice. Very nice, actually. And I can go back. If I double click on this, I turn these back on by clicking on the eyeball to the left here within this layer. And now, even though that's still open, or I'll close it, doesn't really make a difference, it updated this. I'll call it the mother file, right? The other, when I double click on it, is the layered, I'll call it daughter file if you want to go that route. Bear with me on those terms. But there it is. I have access to the individual, we'll say, flattened version within Premiere, and or I have access, when I double click on that, to all the layers still in Premiere. Very nice, actually. And if you ever wanted to impress your corporate client, if you do corporate video, or actually anyone that's watching your video, if you want to impress them, either get their corporate logo in a layered Photoshop document or create one on your own, and then you can animate certain parts of their logo. And boy, I'll tell you, that's a crowd pleaser, especially to the people who are paying you to make that video. And in a later lesson, I will animate this logo and show you what I mean. But it's a great feature in Premiere to allow you to import a Photoshop layered document in 2 or 3 different ways. All right, let's talk about importing a photo. A photo from, let's say, a current DSLR camera, which I'm working in a 1920 by 1080 world here in this sequence, right? 1920 by 1080, basically 2K. And I want to import a photo. Well, you've got to do this first. You have to understand one single item in your preferences before you import. It's so important. So let's look at that. I mentioned this in a previous lesson. Let's navigate up to the word let's navigate up to the word Premiere Pro and select Preferences. And then I'll select General. And on a PC, you want to go up to the word Edit to get to your preferences, right? It's at the bottom. But here on a Mac, you want to navigate up to the word Premiere Pro, select Preferences, and then you want to go to this first item titled General. And there's an item here called Default Scale to Frame Size. And whether this is turned off or on will make a big difference as to when you import photos or graphics that you've downloaded from the internet, or any graphic that somebody may have given you. And let's use both scenarios. I just want to show you what both mean. So if you leave this checked, default scale to frame size, that means it will scale it to the frame size of your sequence, right? So if my sequence is 1920 by 1080, and I'm importing photos that were shot on a DSLR, and the resolution was 5,000 something by 3,000 something, it will scale it down to fit. Let's see what that looks like. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, I don't want that. But then you do, or you may want it more than you think. But let me show you. So I'm going to import by navigating up to the word File, mouse click and select Import. I'll navigate to my DSLR, and there's my DSLR folder, that is. And there are a lot of photos here, lots of good ones. And I'll just take this photo here, number 550. I'll select Import. And that part is not a big deal. That's very straightforward, importing a photo. Okay, that's not that big of a deal. But that preference, when it's turned on, the one I just showed you, default scale to frame size, if I now drag this into my sequence and I park my playhead over, it scaled it down. And you may not see it or understand it, but these black bars should not be there. In other words, if I output my movie right now, I'm going to have these pillar boxes, right? Or these black bars on the side, which I would have to fix this, right? I could double click on this photo, navigate over to the effects control, then navigate to the motion, go to the scale part and mouse click and drag, and then I'd have to blow it up to fit. There we go. And now it fills the entire frame, but I had to blow it up. It's now at 120%. So therein lies the problem. When I import this photo, Premiere does a semi-permanent scale to the resolution. I say semi because this can still be reversed. Okay, but before I show you how to reverse that, let me go turn that preference off and then re-import this. So what I'm getting at is you just need to know before you import your photos which one you want. And you're not going to know until you see what happens. So I'm going to show you the second option. Go back up to the word Premiere Pro, or at least go back to your preferences, go back to General. Let's turn that off, right? Default scale to frame size, turn that off. Select the OK button. I'll go back and I'll get this exact same photo, 550. I'll re-import it. So I'll go back up to the word File, Import, and let's bring that photo back in, 550. There it is. And then I'll drop it on the sequence next to that first photo that I imported. Now with that turned off, watch what happens. Whoa, what happened? Well, we left it alone, basically. And a lot of editors prefer this because now they can zoom into this photo, they can pan and scan basically all over this photo, and the resolution will still be great. But you just need to know which one you want, because this may not work. If you've imported 100 of these pictures and you thought, oh wow, I want these to fit, I want them to scale to the frame size of my sequence, which is really your container. That's really what a sequence is. It's a container to put all your clips and media into, and then you export it out, right? It's like a vehicle, but the resolution is fixed. I'm in a 1920 by 1080 container, or world actually, and the photo, you can only do one or the other. You either leave it alone, which is, this is the result of leaving it alone, or when you do scale to frame size, it'll scale it down. Now remember, a moment ago I mentioned to you that I'd show you how to undo or reverse that scale to frame size, right? Because this photo was the first photo we imported. I'll control click on this photo, take a look, and then I'll select scale to frame size. And I undid the scale to frame size. Did you notice that check mark was there too? That meant it was scaled. Well, now it's back to its original size, which that's pretty easy, because if you import 100 of these photos and you accidentally did one or the other, you can now reverse it. Okay, now what happens when you bring in a photo that you've downloaded? Not a photo. What happens when you bring in an image that you've downloaded from the internet? Now keep one thing in mind. A lot of websites are designed with a lot of images that have been scaled purposely down to save space. A lot of web designers don't want the high resolution, or they do, but then they'll scale them down. So the data file is smaller, the resolution is smaller, and they're not concerned about the high resolution that an editor or a photographer wants to maintain, right? So let me show you what that looks like. I'll go back up to my project tab, mouse click on the word file, then I'll select import. Real quick, I just want to show you what this looks like. I'm going to download a couple of images from the internet. And I want to show this to you because I had scale to frame size turned off, right? So let's go back into our preferences just to make sure. And that's turned off. And I just imported 2 photos with the scale to frame size off. So basically it's going to leave the photo in its native resolution, right? So let's drag this down to my 1920 by 1080 sequence, otherwise known as my container. And whoa, look at that. That's pretty small. And that's because this is a low resolution image that I got from the internet, and it's not 1920 by 1080. In fact, this is probably larger than most images. Sometimes they're really small. They're really small. In order to make this work, I could leave it alone, and then if I were to import my movie, I'd have all this empty space here. It would just remain black. So to fix this, or to scale it, I shouldn't say fix because you're not going to fix it. You just want to fill the frame up, right? You could double click on this to load it into your source window, then navigate to the effects control, right? Go to your motion option, click on the triangle here to point down, and go to your scale here, and then mouse click and drag this over until it fits. In fact, let's get it to fit entirely from left to right, top to bottom, right about there, okay? And I had to blow it up to over 300%. I had to go to 327% just to fill my 1920 by 1080 sequence. And wow, it got soft. Look how soft this is. That's probably not good. But, or however I should say, that's the native size of the photo, right? If I go back to the original 100%, right, I type that back in, that is the original size. So when you have images from the internet, you have to think about this, right? Because they're very low resolution. Most of them are very small. And with that preference, either on or off, and I showed you different options how to reverse it, you've just got to be aware of when you're bringing in photos, all the options you have. When you're bringing in graphic items from the internet, all the options you have. And of course, all the options you have for a Photoshop layered document. So, wow, we covered a lot of ground in this lesson. And if you need to go back and watch this, I would encourage you to do that. Really, I think practicing is the second best thing you can do. The first thing is understanding and realizing when you have that scale to frame size on or off when it pertains to the photos or graphics that you want to import into Premiere Pro CC 2014. So, well, we're done with this lesson. Covered a lot of good stuff. You're now ready for the next lesson.